listening to the Motherhood Experience, a podcast where you are part of the conversation with moms, for moms, and by moms. Let's jump into this episode with me, your host, Val Kleppen. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Motherhood Experience podcast. I am your host, Val Kleppen. Today's guest, I am so thrilled she agreed to be a guest on the podcast, but also that she even had the time to. She is so busy doing so many things, influencing the lives of so many people. About 8 years ago, she wrote a book that was recommended that I read, and I thought, I don't even know who this person is. Why do they want me to read this book? Eventually, I made my way to reading it, completely fell in love with her conversational writing style, the stories that she shared and the power behind them, but also just the way she communicated them in general. I just found myself relating to her and wanting to be her friend. Fast forward a couple of years, and I joined a mastermind she facilitated. One thing I want to point out here, in the mastermind, we had a coaching session, mentoring session, and she said these words to me. She said, I can see you doing something like this for other women, whether it's hosting your own mastermind or I can see you hosting a podcast. And I thought, oh, wow, she thinks that I can do this. And I was a little starstruck in the moment, maybe. But that seed she planted is part of why this episode is even airing today. What she inspired 5 years ago took shape, took place, and now launched months ago into what you know today as the Motherhood Experience podcast. I am so grateful to this woman for so many things, one of which is being vulnerable enough to share her story in a relatable, conversational manner. I am sure you have heard of her before. Her name is Michele Cushatt, and I am thrilled beyond measure to introduce you to my guest and friend today. Let's head into the episode right now. See, my problem is my hair is too small today. I feel a little.
Oh, it looks fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Mine's taking up, by the end, it's going to take up the whole, it'll be right there.
It'll keep expanding. Oh, I love it so much. Well, Michele, thank you so much for joining me on the Motherhood Experience podcast. I'm a little, I'm a lot humbled.
Oh.
But you have one of the most unique stories of motherhood, I think, that I know of. And I have the pleasure of knowing you personally.
Yes.
Which do you even know how do you know how I knew about you?
I'm trying to remember. I mean, because I feel like I've always known you, but I know that it was through the mastermind, but I'm not sure exactly all the prior connections. It's just I'm oh yeah, Val.
So
We've been friends for 52 years now, right? Because that's how old I am. So of course you're not that old. So
I know, but we are not even 10 years apart, though.
Okay, but when we're speaking in decades, not even a decade, I'm still much older than you.
But it was 2015 when a certain book came out.
Yes.
And Travinia Barber and my client at the time, Brian Holmes, had told me, Val, you've got to read this book. You need to read this book. And anytime someone tells me that I need to do something, my immediate response is to lovingly tell them that they need to back up on out of my face.
Yeah, exactly. Don't tell me what to do. I mean, if they came to us and said, you need to breathe oxygen, I'd be like, no, I don't.
Watch me.
Exactly.
So I was sent your book. I think Brian sent me your book, actually. And I put it on the shelf and I was like, when I have time, I'll read it. It happens to be this book right here.
Oh, yes.
And so I put it on the shelf, and then I think I got a canning for dummies or something, which in the apartment that we were living in, we were between houses at the time, I like to say. And so I had to redo the whole bookshelf because we only had a 9-cube bookshelf that had, all of our belongings on it. So I pulled everything out and had to put it back again. And I pulled this out and I saw the cover of all of the houses upside down. And the fact that we were in between houses at the time, I was like, oh, okay, you have my attention, Miss Michele.
That crazy upside down cover,
So,
which I
so I,
still love. Like it's still when they presented with me, when my publisher presented with that cover, I was like, done. That's it.
right. It's
That's it.
so it's it's so encapsulating of the whole thing. Like when your world is turned upside down,
Mm-hmm.
and it can keep turning, right? It's not the same. So I sat down and I read your book in like 2 days. What I loved about it was your writing style, because you write in the way, those memes where it's like what other people think I do, what I think I do.
Yes.
And I thought that I wrote like you, but I don't.
You don't know that. You're not the best judge of your own writing.
And I was like, it's like I'm having coffee with her. I love her writing
Aw.
style and her story. Oh my goodness. It's so serious, but you just threw in these quips of humor, and I was like, that's who I want to be when I grow up.
Oh.
And then your mastermind, I saw had an application. I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose, so I'll just fill this out. And then I was accepted. I was like, there must be some mistake.
Not a mistake. Oh my gosh, it was so much fun.
It was such a blast. And so to get to know you personally, to be coached by you, mentored by you, and really that's part of why this podcast is even here today, because you planted that little seed in my heart, and now here we are, and I'm so grateful.
That's sweet. The redemption is so sweet, and it's my honor to be able to just be one of the many in the bleachers cheering for you. I mean, it's pretty amazing to see full circle all that you've come through too as a mom, and now to be in a position of giving, not just receiving, but then pouring into others. So it's beautiful.
This has been one of the most fun and rewarding and challenging things that I've ever said yes to.
The most worthy things are challenging.
Yes. So that was kind of a longer start to how I normally do things. Normally I start by having the mom share the ages and stages of
well, that's going to take equally as long. Right? That's going to take a long time too, but
right. So go ahead and tell us the ages and stages of where you are in motherhood.
Got it. Well, let's rip the Band-Aid off. I have 6 children. Okay. 6 children, 4 boys, 2 girls, ages 31 to 16. So I have 31, 30, and 26-year-old boys. They're grown. One of those 3 is married. The 26-year-old is married. The other 2, the 30, 31, are still single. They live in Denver. The married 26-year-old is in the Air Force, and he's currently in Texas. And so I have the whole adult children. I now, for the first time since September, have an in-law, a daughter-in-law. That's a new kind of stage of parenting. And then we have the second round of parenting. I like to tell people the reason I have 6 kids is not because I'm really good at it. It's because God knew I needed more practice. And so I have the first 3, and I just feel like God was like, yeah, she didn't quite, let's give her another shot. And so he gave me 3 more, and that's all part of the story. And they are 17, 16, 16. So Irish triplets, there's only 9 months between the oldest and the twins. The 17-year-old's a girl, the twins are one of each. And so 3 months out of the year, they're all the same age, which is really, really fun when you have, teenagers. So, and if you did not pick up on the sarcasm, that was hardcore sarcasm. So 17, 16, 16, and I am on a roller coaster of everybody's emotions all day long. That's what we do here.
And you cycled through the different stages of parenting multiple times.
Multiple times.
We'll get into that. But what was your entrance into motherhood?
Well, my very complicated story. So I became a mom on Valentine's Day, 1997. That should have been a hint at what is to come, that all illusions of like a happily ever after, a Cinderella story, a romance were gone when I gave birth to my first child on Valentine's Day. And so that's my 26-year-old, believe it or not. So that's my first child. That's when I became a mom. I always bring up to him almost once every time he's home is that he was 9.5 pounds and he took almost 24 hours to come into the world. And I'm like, that's been my story ever since. And you cannot complain about me as a mother because that is what you did to me right off the bat. So that's my entrance into the foray of motherhood. Now, on a more serious side, it was only 20 months after that I watched my husband drive away for the last time. It was 6 days before Christmas. I was holding that 1.5-year-old son on my hip and became a single mom, a divorced single mom, just like that. And not what I ever wanted, not what I ever dreamed of, not what I could have expected or planned for. I was raised in a very conservative Christian household background where marriage was for life and there were no options other than that. Once you said I do, it was done. And
Right.
so to be 27 with a 1.5-year-old and, unexpectedly a single mom, that was, that took me into single motherhood, which is a whole different experience than traditional family motherhood.
And certainly never how you anticipated your parenthood journey
No, not in a
would
million
end up
years.
at all.
Mm-mm.
Kind of
And crushing to me. Like my only dream my whole life was to be a wife and a mom. So, I mean, I had very traditional sense of my life, my future. I actually had gone to school I was going to do medical school, possibly be a pediatrician, was going in the medical field, ended up getting a nursing degree because it made more sense. To have children and a family than being a medical doctor in my mind in the 90s. And so, I was literally making career decisions around my dream passion of being a wife and mom. So this whole single motherhood divorce thing was crushing for me.
Yeah. Did you ever anticipate or expect that you would rebuild or remarry?
Well, initially I was like, there's no way. There's just not a chance that I will ever do that again. I mean,
Yeah.
it was and I can't go into details because it's not entirely my story to share, but what happened in that relationship was so traumatic and so painful that I mean, it almost killed me. So I couldn't imagine doing that again. And then a very short time later, I see this cute guy at church. It's always the cute guy at church. Gosh,
Troublemaker.
why? I know. And he had 2 boys. I had 1 boy. They were all about the same age. We were both unexpectedly divorced. We became friends because we were the only 2 divorced people in the church, I'm pretty sure. And so we created an alliance. Call it a trauma bond, call it whatever you want. Here we were. And we thought, well, wouldn't it be, after a couple of years, we were like, wouldn't it be a great idea just to, put our families together and get married? It couldn't be that hard. And think of all the money we would save by, not having 2 households. And with that naivete, I entered into step family and step motherhood. And oh my goodness, it was a whole nother experience.
With 2 sons who were older than your own.
So when we got married, our kids were 9, 7, and 4.5.
Wow.
And we, both of us had been married before. So we had exes on both sides, and we had, family and parenting schedules and parent-teacher conferences with multiple people there and all of it. I mean, just let me tell you, it is a mess. It is a mess. And for those listening that have had some experience with step family, it's complicated.
Right. Well, in the holidays, I had never even thought of parent-teacher conferences.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Sporting events, parent-teacher conferences.
Right.
It's just everything becomes a battleground. And unfortunately, not always. Some have a great scenario, but when it's contentious at all, or when it's complicated at all, it can become, even the smallest things can become a war. And so, or at the very least, a very stressful, heavy, complicated, even the smallest things like a parent-teacher conference can become a loaded scenario.
Right. All on its own. And you and your husband had your own parenting styles, and your own children were used to those. And then to combine that under one roof had to take some navigating, I'm sure.
It took about 10 years of navigating before we yes, absolutely. We have very different styles, very different personalities. And then I would add, whenever you've gone through the loss of a a nuclear family, a core family, traditional family, whatever, whenever you go through a loss of kind of family structure and have to have a new structure, regardless of the reason, whether it's a death or a divorce or whatever, um, you're not just going into a whole new, basically, organization and structure, but you're taking with you a bleeding limb, right? You've had something ripped off of you and you are bleeding, like you are just wounded and broken and hurt, and not just the adults but the kids too. It's everybody is. And then you
Yeah.
throw everybody in one house
Yeah.
and say, okay, now get along. And it's just a lot of pain and a lot of wounds all in one home, and good intentions. I mean, I would say in our scenario there were lots of good intentions everywhere, and we loved each other, we wanted it all to work out, but um good intentions don't heal deep wounds.
Right. Right. Which how did the boys, did they get along like brothers? Was it more like
Yeah.
school friends?
It was like brothers. And when you have three, so we had, the older two, which were my husband's sons, and the youngest, who was mine. And now we've been married for so long, they're just all my kids, right? But
Right. Right.
I have to stop myself and remind myself. But at the time, um, the youngest was 4.5, the oldest was 9.5. So there was that 5 years between them. And that's a pretty significant age between
Mhm.
a fifth grader and a kindergartner, or a fourth grader and a kindergartner. And again, everybody had their own kind of trauma and how that showed itself. And so they behaved like brothers. I mean, they fought like cats and dogs, but then some days they got along and had a blast. We just never do.
Yeah. Do you and your husband have siblings also?
Yes.
Just
So I have a younger brother, and my husband has two older sisters, which is its own interesting dynamic.
okay. Because it's just me and my sister in, like, for me growing up. And so, and then I have Haley and Heston, and so I wonder what it would be like if I had had more siblings, or if
Mm.
or if bringing another one into our household right now, what
Yeah,
kind of
what it would be
dynamic?
like. Well,
Yeah.
in our scenario, when you have a blended family scenario, you have loyalties between biological parents and biological kids. And then what you have is, because trauma and loss kind of creates a measure of insecurity, right? Then when you have to share your biological parent with a stepbrother or stepsister or
Hmm.
a stepmom, right? It can become very competitive, that they feel that insecurity makes them feel like they have to get more of biological dad or mom's attention. And so it becomes almost a competition and almost a sense of being threatened by the presence of these new step family members. And again, when we're talking about 4, 7, and 9-year-olds, it's not conscious. It's not like they're
Right.
sitting there thinking, I'm feeling threatened. They can't even articulate that. And so it comes out sideways.
Right. Right. So then how many years was it between you moving into a blended household to three more children
Yeah.
showing up?
It was 10 years, almost exactly, a decade. So we
So
had really gotten to the point, and people will tell you, when you talk to step family, blended family experts, it takes 5 to 10 years to kind of settle in, which I know that sounds like a ridiculously long time, but it's so complicated and hard that
yeah.
you really have to have a whole different timeline for adjustment and everything else. And it's really like 5 to 10 years. And for us, we had such kind of a high stress scenario that it was really around the 8 to 10 mark that we felt like we were, okay, we can do this, we can do this. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. The oldest two were graduating. One had graduated. Two had just graduated. So one and the other a year after each other. And so we had our third son, who was still at home. So we were at that point where, like, we've made it, we've done it, we've done the marathon, we've survived, we're still married, our kids like us occasionally, we feel like that's successful, right? And it was right then, right after our 10th anniversary, we got a phone call asking us, told us about 2 4-year-olds and a 5-year-old who could no longer remain with their biological parent because it wasn't a safe environment. And the biological parent was actually ready to relinquish, and had said, that wanted us to take them. And so the question was asked of us, will you take them? And you know, on one hand, I was like, no, are you kidding me? We are almost, we are almost at the finish line. No way. And then the other part of me, and Troy was the same, we'd always been passionate about ministry and we had planned to go on the mission field. And we both felt very clearly that God was saying, you said you would follow me anywhere, do anything, you would go anywhere. I'm not asking you to go, I'm asking you to stay. Will you take them? In other
And
words,
from that,
the mission field was going to be in my home, not in some other country. It was here. And 24 hours later, we went and got him.
and once you saw them, I love how you write about it in Undone. Once you saw them, your heart, was like, this is it. This is the right thing for us to do.
Yes, it was. We tend to sometimes glamorize some of these stories, and I'm resistant to that because, first of all, it makes me way too noble, and I'm really not noble. Okay, I'm just not. And it gives us way too much credit for doing this thing, and that's not really it's. So I want to be really clear. It's been one of the hardest things I've ever done, and I've done a lot of hard things. And so there was definitely a moment where like, yes, this is what God is asking us to do. But there was also a weight of reality of what this actually meant. This was not like a 2-week visit. This was for the rest of our lives.
Right.
And that's a pretty significant commitment.
Right. And so by that point, you had kind of entered all of the stages of motherhood. Traditional family motherhood, divorced single mom, blended family, now step family, and now you're entering into the stage of parenthood, or not stage really, but of adoption.
Foster adoption, because it was like fostering for the first several years before the adoption. And that's its own thing.
Right, right. And then in the midst of that, you got another phone call.
Yes. So in the midst of all these different transitions, I also got a phone call from a doctor. I had a sore on the side of my tongue that refused to be healed, and went to the doctor. Went to an ENT thinking it was no big deal. Ended up finding out a few days later that I had squamous cell carcinoma of the tongue, cancer of the tongue. So that started, this is when I was 39 years old. And, my first diagnosis actually came 8 months before we took in the youngest 3 kids. But, they thought it was kind of eventually after all the PET scans and surgery and everything, they said it was cancer caught early. You have nothing to worry about. Only they proved to be wrong. And cancer came back a second time 3 years later, and a third time just about 8 months after that. So now we've got, by that third diagnosis, I was 44. We had 43, something like that. We had 2 kids grown, 1 kid still at home that was a senior in high school. And then we had the 3 that we had foster adopted who were, I believe, 7, 7, 8 at the time. Or 8, 8, 9, no, 7, 7, 8. So imagine, and that third cancer diagnosis was so much more serious and severe and aggressive. So when cancer keeps coming back that many times, it gets more gnarly every time. And by that third time, they gave me about 2 weeks to kind of get my calendar in order, my affairs in order. And they did a 9-hour surgery where they removed 2/3 of my tongue, removed a dozen lymph nodes, my submandibular gland, cut me open on my arm from wrist to elbow to kind of take out tissue vessels to rebuild my mouth, as well as they cut open my neck, did the same. And then another one on my leg to rebuild my arm, rebuild my neck. I was like Humpty Dumpty. And then they gave me a month to recover from surgery, at which point in time they did external radiation and chemotherapy. And so all I have to say, now you've got 3 trauma kids at home and a senior in high school who are watching their mom almost die. Like they don't know if she's going to live. And this goes on for a year to 2 where I was skin and bones. I had burns all over my face and neck and chest. I mean, I looked horrible. And they had to look at this and imagine what that's like going through as a mom as well, with all these different dynamics. It's a whole new way to experience motherhood too, when you realize that you may not be around to actually be a mom to them.
Right. I can about imagine. But your career also in that time. So you mentioned nursing early on in motherhood, but then you went on to writing and speaking. Speaking was your career.
Yes.
You're going hither and thither, as the kids say. Nobody says that. But you
We
were
did. We can say it if we want to. We're moms. We can make up
Yeah,
words.
that's right. That's right. So you were speaking all over it, and then all of a sudden you have an entire new family. You have an entire new diagnosis, healthcare regimen. You're trying to take care of your household. You're trying to take care of your health. You're trying to take care of the traumatized hearts of these 3 kids. How did you stay sane?
Well, and I didn't. I mean, I think that's kind of really, that sounds flippant, and it's not. Yes, trying to take care of all these things, but the reality is I was going through significant medical trauma. If you could see some of the treatments and things that they did on my body and how horrific and traumatic they were. And they had to do it hoping to save my life, but it
Mhm.
wasn't pretty. And it wasn't just one day, it was months and months. I mean, without going into detail, I was on fentanyl for 6 months, 24 hours a day. Okay, fentanyl patches, as well as liquid morphine on top of that, just to make my pain bearable enough that I wouldn't go in shock and die from the pain.
Mm,
So we're talking levels of extreme physical suffering and trauma that I was navigating. So I'm supposed to be the adult with these kiddos, but now I'm basically having trauma and PTSD and responses left and right too. And so, my husband's a real hero during that season because he was trying to keep everybody together. But
right.
you can imagine how um, over because it took me 2 years to kind of come back to life, but then that was a survival. But then I emotionally had to deal with the fallout from all of that.
Right.
Because now we have cumulative chronic trauma. We've got divorce and, abandonment on one level, single motherhood, step family, blended family, foster adoption of trauma kids. And now we have medical trauma and near death. The amount of trauma that my family has had to wade through is wildly extreme.
Yeah.
And that causes emotional breakdown, right? And so for me personally, I can say there was all kinds of PTSD. Going to the dentist was not just going to the dentist. All right.
Right.
And depression and despairing of life. I live with chronic pain now. So even adjusting to this new life post cancer for the last 8 years comes with ongoing physical pain. And, so I say that because I think it's so important. We as moms, we work so hard to take care of everybody else, but there are times when we have nothing left to give. And that is
Yeah.
not a complaint, that's just facts.
Yes.
And what do we do
So
when that happens?
so what I want to talk about mom guilt a little bit, just
Mm-hmm.
because I think that every mother endures it to some degree. But you were medically incapacitated for a few years in there, trying to help these 3 children, your own son, your 2 stepsons, navigate lives in their completely different stages. What was the mom guilt, if you can even call it that? What was that like for you coming out of being sedated essentially just so that you could function,
Yeah.
to pouring into the lives of your kids again?
I mean, it was awful. I mean, it was just, it was guilt, but it was also fear that I had lost them. Like at some
Mm,
level, they all had learned to go on with life without me. I mean, for a good year and a half, I was on the couch,
yeah,
or in bed, and to watch and listen to your family move on with life without you, to go and do activities that you can't join, to eat dinner. I mean, even something as simple as eating at the kitchen table. I could not eat. I had a feeding tube for 6 months, 5 months, and a tracheostomy for 2 months. So even, sitting at the kitchen table for a family dinner was something that I could not participate in. And so imagine being inside your home, but completely outside the circle of your family,
mm,
the family that had been everything to you before, right? And so it was guilt, it was fear, it was insecure. Like I was trying so hard to re-enter that and be a part of it again, but I could never re-enter it like I was before because too much
mm,
had happened. And what to
mhm.
do with that, So um, and a combination of feeling like I'd failed. I think of my son who was a senior in high school when I was so sick. I don't hardly remember anything about his senior year. And I hardly saw him because it was too painful for him to be home and see how sick I was. So he was at his friend's house all the time, like almost every night, having dinner at a friend's house. And, feeling guilty that I had done that to him. I
Mm-hmm.
robbed him of his senior year. And of course, I didn't cause it, but in our minds as moms, it's like, feeling that weight of the fact that I can't give that back to him. There's nothing I can do about that.
Yeah. What was your level of trust like, or was there one in your faith, not only with the Lord helping you walk through this, but with him guiding and parenting your children when you couldn't?
It was varied. Okay, so we're
Yeah.
talking, this wasn't a 2-week illness. This wasn't even a
Right.
3-month illness. This is, basically now, my first diagnosis with cancer was 2010. So I've been living with cancer off and off for 13 years now. The most intense season was at 4 to 5 years, from 210 to 215 and 16. So 5, 6 years. But faith wise, in those years of 2014, 15, 16, 17, when finally the extent of physical suffering and the fear of death and all of that, the losses had become so big that I couldn't muscle through anymore. That's when I really wrestled with my faith. I mean, I don't know if we met in 2015, you wouldn't have probably seen it online, but there were thousands of people praying for my healing. I mean, thousands of people praying. And yet cancer kept coming back. And what do you do with that? And then I sit there and I would wrestle with, and listen to how self-righteous I am. You ready? I would say, I took in 3 kids. I took in 3 more kids for you. How could you let this happen? Or I'm parenting all these, so I'm trying so hard. And there was a sense of, that I was doing all this stuff for God, quote unquote. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And God was falling down on the job. And that's where my trust was really struggling. I had given him my whole life. I had served him with all my heart, soul, mind, strength, I thought. So why was I suffering so much? And was it personal? Was God punishing me? And if he was punishing me, either I couldn't trust myself or I couldn't trust him. And neither one is a good answer, right? Neither one is a good
Yeah.
scenario. So I would say it was a journey, and it would go up and down. And there was several months where I was in a pretty dark pit, not sure if God was really worthy of my trust anymore. And I know you've been there with your own story.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you're sharing that, I'm going back to what you said about when you took in your 3 youngest kids and the mission was brought home, that the mission field did not change, but there were overlapping missions there. So you had these overlapping missions of motherhood. You had an overlapping mission now of surviving
Like
cancer,
literally, yeah, life and death.
literally, of living through all of the expectations on you as a mom, a wife, a speaker, an author. I that whole season in your life was like your Jacob moment.
Wrestling,
You wrestled
yeah.
with God, and you'll never be the same
Never the
after
same.
that.
And honestly, thank God for that. Hardcore, literally, thank God for that. And I would never wish to go through that again. So I'm not a masochist. I'm not saying I would go, it was so much fun. It was horrific. And I still have nightmares about it sometimes. So, I mean, it's legit.
Right.
But the changes that God brought to my heart and my mind and my life, they didn't come in spite of the suffering, but as a direct result of it. And they were also necessary. I'm going to be cautious in how I say that, but necessary growth curves for me, like growth edges for me. And he didn't cause cancer. I don't believe that. I don't think he sat there and said, I'm going to zap her with cancer. But for whatever reason, he allowed my life to unfold as it did. But he took all of that. He did not waste a bit of it. And what he produced, the fruits and the growth, the insight, the awareness of his presence and love, I wouldn't trade for the world. I mean,
Yeah.
and I couldn't have done it I couldn't have accomplished that in my heart and mind with any amount of Bible study. I mean, I needed to see him in the dark in order to really see him and know him at that level. And, um, I mean, it's incredible, but boy, the road, it was hard. It was hard won and it came at a cost.
Yeah. Well, from that, so I'm missing your newest one, but so I have Undone. I'm fangirling on you right now.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Relentless and I've got them here, which I mean, these truly are all of them are fruits of
Yeah.
what you've been through.
I wouldn't have written them without this whole scenario. They're really
Right.
the journey of a Christian girl that grew up reading the Bible and expected faith to be a formula, and then over the last 30 years discovered that, things don't always go according to plan, and faith is not a formula. It's like an
And
adventure.
that is another thing that I loved so much when I sat down and read Undone for the first time back in, late 2015, early 2016, when I finally got around to it, I think, was you're not saying, look at what I've been through and how great I am. You're saying, this is hard. We need to talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not telling you that I have it all together, but I'm telling you that I have a story that needs to be shared. And so here it is. And that just resonated so much with me. Mm. And so many others too. I mean, I see the comments on your social media. People love you for that reason all the time. And in your speaking engagements and all of this, I mean, it's so important that we don't think because we have fought a battle and come out on the other side that we are ultimate victors or experts, or I mean,
I don't see myself as a victor. I see myself as somebody who's been rescued, because there really was nothing I did to come back to faith, to kind of muscle my way to faith. I mean, I was at I can't overstate how low I was. Like, I had lost even the will to wake up and live. And that is not how I'm wired up. That's how deep the despair went. Right. And God came and just grabbed me and drug me out and found me worth saving. So, like, I don't like using the phrase cancer survivor or cancer thriver or I overcame it or whatever, because I mean, really, I shouldn't be here, and I know it. There's nothing I did to be here. It's nothing but grace and mercy.
But Michele, even if cancer was not a part of your story, the things in life that you have endured and followed through on, I mean, it's no small feat.
Yeah, and again, I don't take credit for those either. I don't even think I'm that. I'm not an amazing mom. You're most likely never going to see me write a parenting book because it's just hard. And I just think that's so important, because we as we put so much pressure on ourselves. And we think we have to muscle up, and we think we have to, basically pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, and we have to be tough and strong. And the reality is we cannot save ourselves. There are some circumstances, some scenarios, some losses that we can't muscle through. We have to be carried. And we have to trust that, the imagery, the language used around God being a mother to us, like a hen covers her chicks with her feathers. That's what the Father does for us. That's very feminine language for God. And so, thinking, I'm not trying to open a theological can of worms here, but that is a God who is not afraid of being tender. Yeah. He's also mighty and powerful and strong and in authority and fully just and righteous. So he's not soft, but he is both ultimately fully mighty and powerful and fully tender and compassionate, all in the same package. And we don't have to be the ones that muscle through. Sometimes we can just let ourselves be carried.
Oh, raise your hand if you needed to hear that today. Yes. That's so good. And how does that translate into it seems like I'm shifting gears here kind of awkwardly, and maybe I am, but how does that translate to you in your writing today and in your mothering? Do you ever carry the experiences that you have in motherhood into your writing with like what am I trying to say here? Do your kids like it when you share stories about them? Because I have a 13-year-old who wants me to only share stories about her.
Mm-hmm.
But do your kids like it? Do they like it when you focus more on the faith side of it? Like, what is their view on your writing and speaking?
Yeah. Well, it depends on the child and it depends on the day. So I have one child that, one of my 6 that is like, Mom, did you share that? Mom, share that. Make sure you post that. Share that. Oh, make sure you tag me when you post pictures of me, Mom. You know, I just hear that all the time. I'm like, oh my gosh, loves the attention, just loves
Yeah.
it. Will go to Barnes and Noble and buy my stuff and immediately look for the stories that are about that child because they love reading about themselves. And then I have others. And by the way, the whole world of social media now and digital, I've raised kids in 2 different kind of realities, social culture
Right, right,
realities, right? Because they're 15 years between the first set, second set. And it's a very
right.
different world now than it was, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I have others that their friends will follow my accounts and find things I post and then use it against my kids. So even if they're okay with me posting, it comes back to bite them. So I'm really, really careful. And a couple of my kids really don't want anything posted, no pictures of them. They're very self-conscious. Some felt like that a couple of years ago, and now they're like, no, we want you to post about us. So it depends. And so I ask them, I try to stay sensitive to that. That's why if you look at my Instagram, you won't find many pictures of my kids, my husband. You just don't. They're more private, and I don't want my social world to create problems for them. That's just not what it's about. And so I do focus more on faith, often for that reason rather than motherhood, not to mention the fact that I really don't consider myself an expert. All I know is I love Jesus and try to point people to him in whatever scenario they find themselves in, including motherhood.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I hope this whole podcast, this episode, but the whole podcast really portrays is that I'm not interviewing experts, and I believe that the Lord put this platform in front of me because there are stories to be shared, and this is an avenue in which to share it. And one of my guests and friends said, like, the one thing that she loves about my podcast is she hasn't experienced what all of the other moms have experienced, but there's always something that they share that she relates to. And she finds that solidarity in that episode. Like, okay, there's another mom who gets it. And I think that's so important for us as moms.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there is a place for experts and books and how to and all of that. But I think often what we just need to hear is we're not the only ones that are struggling to figure it out. That don't always know what to do, that sometimes kids don't follow a formula. In fact, most of the time they don't. And sometimes, no matter how hard we try to control everything, we have to come face to face with the fact that we're not in control. And can we find, like you said it so well, solidarity with each other, not just a shame or you should have done this or that, just solidarity. That can get us through sometimes. So.
Yeah. Well, I've really want to respect your time too. So I would love for you to tell me how the best way people can get in touch with you and find out what you're up to and what you're releasing and all of the things.
Yeah, absolutely. So my most recent book just released a few months ago. It's called A Faith That Will Not Fail, 10 Practices to Build Up Your Faith When Your World is Falling Apart. And it's meant to be a highly accessible, palatable resource for people who just need basically a tiny lifeline every day. So there's 50 chapters in it. The chapters can be read in about 5 to 10 minutes. It's like a quick injection of good, solid theology that is kind of presented in a story. So, it just helps those of us that feel like I'm hanging on by a thread. I'm not sure what I believe anymore. This resource is supposed to be something you can easily reach for on your nightstand or on your desk or in the car and just get a little bit of hope. So that is my most recent resource. I don't have any other books coming out in the near future. So that is number 4. Best place to find me is at my website. That's where you can get all my books. I also have tons of free resources. So if you go to the resource page, you can download all kinds of free resources, videos, all kinds of stuff. And it also has the links to my social media accounts. I spend most of my time on Facebook and Instagram. And, I try to be a little safe, light, positive place that is not afraid to be real in a social media world that can be kind of toxic sometimes. So
Yes,
you don't typically find anything toxic on my site.
that's right. So as we wrap up, then what encouragement would you offer to moms right now who are walking through that unexpected life?
To some measure, I think all of moms right now are walking through unexpected life because our culture has changed so rapidly in the last 3 years, 3 to 4 years. And those of us who had kids during COVID who were in school, that's created a whole scenario, of struggle. Socially, our economic world, our political world, our emotional world right now is just kind of in chaos. And I think people are feeling insecure everywhere. And as moms, we carry all of that on our shoulders because we're so
Yes.
worried about all of it. And what does this mean for our kids and everything? And all I can tell you, and this is my encouragement for you, and it's the most important thing. Okay. God is still in charge. He hasn't lost any authority. His plan is not off the rails. His plan A is still plan A. It's already been accomplished. It's already going to happen. It will all be redeemed. And no matter how much you love and worry about your kids, your Father's eyes are on them more than yours. And if God could chase me down and pursue me through the last 52 years and work through unbelievable hard things in order to capture my heart, he can do that for your kids too.
Amen. So good. Michele, I love you so much.
Likewise.
Thank you for being a guest on the Motherhood Experience podcast. If you are listening, please leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. To join our exclusive TME community, head on over to themotherhoodexperience.com/learn more. Be sure to follow the Motherhood Experience on Facebook and Instagram, and please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment below, and we'll catch you next time.